Jenkins mini course, module 2, checking test system environments before starting your tests. So we've installed Jenkins. We have the home page for Jenkins where we can start to configure some of our jobs and new items. So before we go anywhere, let's just make sure we understand these two core concepts, the job and the build. Again, we've got 3 jobs, one to install the app, one to run our tests, and one to collate the test results. And each job can be run multiple times. So we can have a job with one build, run it again, we get the second build, get the third build, etc, etc, etc. So one job, many builds. Each job will consist of many steps. So this job might have 3 steps, and this one might have 4 steps, and these steps are generally split into 3 different categories. So you would have the first category, which is the setup and triggers. So this might do the deployment of the code for the application we're going to test. The next set of steps would be the build steps, or the execution steps if you like. So this might start the application running. And then you have a third set of steps, which are what they're called the post-build actions. So these might tidy up the job afterwards and might collect any artifacts or files that you want to save and store. When you define the jobs, you're literally just listing the steps that job should carry out each time you run it. So when we run it the first time, that first run will execute all of these steps: the setup, the build, and the post-build actions. So the core concept is that this is considered a job, or sometimes it's called a project, or sometimes even an item. And then each time we run that job, we have a number of builds, or from a test perspective, when we're running automated test jobs, I like to sometimes think of this also as a test run. Now that we've grasped those concepts, let's start building our first job. And in this module, what we want to do is create some jobs and processes that check the environments where our tests are about to run. We want to make sure the test environment is stable so that we end up with stable test results. So these example jobs we're going to show you how to continuously monitor your test environment and check the status. Any deviation from that expected environment status will raise an alert in Jenkins that will notify you. So the goal: to check the status of your test environment prior to running any automated tests. We'll create 2 jobs. The first job will capture a baseline. The second job will capture a snapshot at that point in time and compare it against the baseline. Any deviation, raise an alert. If the comparison's good, we'll continue, and perhaps then we might kick off our test runs or carry out some other action. Now, to implement this, we need to add some plugins to Jenkins. Jenkins has a concept of plugins, so whenever you want to add a bit of functionality, somebody else might have developed a plugin, and you can download and install that plugin and enhance the features and capabilities of Jenkins. Now, the 3 plugins we want are the copy artifact plugin, which copies a file or an artifact from a job that's run and stores it. We'll want the text file operations plugin and the artifact diff plugin, which we'll use to diff our baseline and our snapshot to make sure that the comparison is good. Now, to install those plugins, we go to Manage Jenkins, and you'll see the Manage Plugins option, and under the Available tab we can search for those plugins. So in the filter we'll type copy art, and there's a copy artifact plugin. Select that. We need the text file, it'll be text, not test, text file operations plugin, and we need the diff plugin. Artifact diff. So we've selected 3 plugins to install. install without restart, and Jenkins goes off, downloads and automatically installs all three of those plugins. In this instance we're going to opt not to restart Jenkins, but sometimes it'd be wise to, and you can automatically do that by checking this box. But we've successfully installed those three plugins. If we go back to Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins, we'll see on the installed page that we have installed those plugins, and they've been added to the default set of plugins that were automatically installed when we set up Jenkins. Next then we need to set up these jobs, and if we go back to Jenkins we'll see in the top menu there's a new items button, and this allows us to create new jobs or new processes. We're going to create two new processes or two new jobs or items. One will be our baseline job and the other will be our snapshot job. Both of those jobs are going to run a command system info, and we'll pipe that into find string /v memory, which removes all the memory statements from the output of the system info, because that memory will change from one run to the next, so we don't want to compare that. We just want to compare between the baseline and the snapshot the static data on this test environment from each run. Now this is just an example, one way of doing this. You may come up with something or may need something more creative or more advanced to do these. Check your test environments before the run, but I just want to use system info to emphasize the basic concept of doing a baseline and a snapshot and comparing environment status before we run our tests in Jenkins. So we'll create our first job then, new item, and we'll create our initial job with the name of check get baseline, and we're creating a freestyle project, and we click on OK. So this creates a job in Jenkins, and we've called it check get baseline. We can add some description to it, but now what we want to do is add some steps or bits of the process that apply to this job, and we do that in the build section. And in here we can create, run or execute a Windows batch command, and what we want to run is that system info command, and we remove all the memory related lines from that output, and then we're going to feed that output into a file called baseline.txt, and then we'll just run the dir command. And once we've created that file that creates our baseline or contains our baseline system info, we want to store that as an artifact within this Jenkins job. So we can click on Post Build Actions, archive the artifacts, and we want to archive that file. Paste that in and save the job. In Jenkins there's a concept of a job which we've just created, and then you've got the builds or the runs, if you like, of that particular job. So we can click on build now, and you can see that Jenkins has gone off and is running those build steps related to this job. And if we drill into that instance or that run, we can see a number of things about this particular job and this run. The console output, the build information, and we can see the artifact information that was stored and archived, so the baseline.txt file. So first, console output, and we can see what this job did exactly, and you can see here it ran this command, system info, piped that into baseline.txt, then did the dir statement and archived the artifacts. And if we go back to this instance or this run of the job, you can see here that we've got the baseline.txt file saved, and if we click on that you can see all of the information associated with that particular run. And we can run this multiple times. We can say at the job level build again, and it'll run a second time, a third time, fourth time, creating those baseline details about our environment and storing them in the baseline.txt artifact within Jenkins. So next then we want to create our second job, and this will be our snapshot. So this snapshot job will be run prior to running our tests, and it will capture the system information and compare it against our baseline. If the comparison's good, we can run our tests. If the comparison fails, we want to stop because we know that our test environment is not in the right state. So we create a new job, new item. We give this one the name check get snapshot. It's a freestyle project. Click on OK, and then we define the build information and the build steps for this particular job. So to do that comparison, which we'll do within this particular job, we've got a build step where we want to copy the artifacts from the other project. So we want to copy the artifact from our baseline project so we can use it as part of the comparison. Where to get it from? Check get baseline, and we want to get the latest successful build and the artifacts to copy, which is the file baseline.txt. So this gives us the baseline.txt from the baseline, and now we need to capture the snapshot system information that we're going to do the comparison to the baseline with. So we add a second build step, which is the execute Windows batch command. We want to add our system info statement in there that captures the snapshot version of this system information. But in this instance, you'll notice that we're saving the snapshot information to the snapshot.txt file. Final step then, create the comparison build step. Again, we'll do another execute Windows batch command, and in here we do a file comparison. So file compare baseline.txt, which is copied in from the baseline job, to our snapshot.txt, which is created as part of this job. Save the job, and this time when we execute this particular job, the check get snapshot, we do a build now, it runs the job, and we can view the console output and we can see what this particular job does. So again, the steps it goes through: copied the artifact from check get baseline, and it copied the artifact from the third build that we ran. The third one was the last successful one. It then ran our system info to create the snapshot.txt. It then did the dir statement, and we've got the baseline.txt and the snapshot.txt files present. And it did the file compare, comparing the files baseline.txt and snapshot.txt, and it found no differences. And the output from that file compare is a success or a 0 status, and that means that this particular job passed and that there were no comparison differences that resulted in any errors. If we click build now a few more times, just rerun this job, check the comparison works okay multiple times. So build now. And that's 4 runs of this particular job. We can go in and we can view the job, check the status, and we'll see that each time there were no differences encountered. What I'm going to do is just quickly force a difference so that you can see what happens when we get a comparison failure. So we can go back to the project, check get snapshot. We can configure this job, and what I'll do in this instance, just to force the failure, is I'll remove the find string -v, which removes the memory statements or output from there. So that'll add additional information in that comparison, and when we build now, there should be a difference between these two jobs. So in build 5, you'll see we've got a failure, and if we come in and look at the console output, we'll see here that the comparison of the files shows some differences. In the baseline we had that, and in the snapshot we had further information which included the memory, and there is a difference in that comparison, and the build or the comparison fails. So in summary then, we've created a very basic system comparison set of jobs, 2 jobs. In the real world we'd be using something a little more or a lot more complex, but these commands to capture the baseline and the snapshot might, for example, include SQL statements, config file checks, etc., etc. If your test environment does change, you'd want to run the baseline job again and create a new baseline, and every time prior to running your tests you'd run the check get snapshot, and you could even automate the trigger of this execution. You'll notice that in the configuration area, for example, there are options to set the build triggers, and you can set things like trigger off source code control systems. You can build it periodically by putting schedules in here, or you could build it after other projects. For example, your build system might have sent out the executable that needs to be tested, and that might be installed by Jenkins, and that job would then trigger this job. But what we've given you above in this module is the basic framework that allows you to make these checks and help you build on the stability of your overall automated testing efforts. Learn more at automatedtesting.com.